And this is the way his book starts. He paid this huge amount to Sue Atkins to turn state's evidence. And I'm going to read you what he had to say. I read you what Ed Butler said, who worked with Oswald. Here is Schiller. He said, where did it all start? We can see them going to San Francisco with flowers in their hair. They're flower children. The Haight-Ashbury hippies linked together in the history of the Americas of 1960. I'm going to stop the quote now to say this is where we started this hour, that I began in 67 with those flower children and started a file in my filing system on the flower children, knowing that within 2 to 3 years, everything would break down on their heads. Now, it's interesting that Lawrence Schiller begins his book, Where Did It All Start? We see them on the road, those flower children. He said, a movement which sprang from multiple revolutions of the 60s, the new morality, the revolt of youth. The middle class watched them, relieved, happy to be spectators, when the Sharon Tate murder happened because it was two out-groups that fell on each other. The people that were making their loose, sexy implies and the drugs, it was two out-groups hitting at each other. Now he goes, and the youth of today followed the precepts of their forebears until this time. But mass communication changed everything and changed our youth. They traveled, they had experiences, information, money. And how could you bring people inundated with facts of life to believe the Puritan ethic? I'm going to digress again. Stop the quote. We talked about Greece. I was watching Greece for 2 years. I was watching the hippies. Here is Lawrence Schiller in the thick of everything, telling you just where I was 2 years earlier, watching how it was going to come down. Now, we're getting back to his quotation. Young people, having rejected the ethics, rejected the laws which were based upon them, and they were ripe for new liberation. And then he perverts the whole thing and says, when Charlie Manson came along, our chemical messiah, and the essence of their life was anti-establishment, they had thrown down the Puritan ethics, the laws, he implies they could become lawless and immoral and throw around their sex and their bodies, and they latched on to what he called the chemical messiah. Now, who bought the LSD and the chemicals? Did our government pay Charlie's way, his bus, his gas? Was he a chemical messiah, or is he designed out of Texas or Muscle Shoals, Alabama, where everything else is assigned and the lawyers are sent? Who designed Charlie Manson? Lawrence Schiller is telling you he's a chemical messiah, and I'm saying somebody bought his chemistry. It wasn't all handed to him. And the government brought it to him and put on his costume, his leather coat, and his guitar, and said, Charlie, get on the road. Now, Schiller says Manson drifted into the hippie scene, and he admits he was another ex-con seeking protective coloration from the hippies. I claim that he was an ex-con who went into the hippie scene to pick up the jargon, to do a job like the mafia does, a job like we do in Vietnam, like a soldier goes out to kill. We send boys out to Fort Ord for 6 weeks training, chanting, kill the commies. Would they pick up the jargon of the jungle because they're going to be in the jungle? They didn't arrive that way. We teach them the jargon. And Charlie Manson was taught because he was going to pretend to be a hippie. He hated the hippie being called a hippie. The book mentions it. He disliked being called a hippie. So they put him in a beat-up school bus, and they called it the Manson family, and they headed south. And Manson learned to play the guitar and to sing and write music. And that was his last occupation. This is what he was trained for in the federal prison. Lawrence Schiller tells you in the federal prison they rehabilitate you to go out on the street, and they bought Charlie a guitar. And he had an inkling for music, and he was a natural. He's probably horny as hell and wanting to get on the road anyway, you know. And he was just a beautiful natural. He had all this hostility. He said, I did it because I wanted to make it look like the blacks were doing it. I wanted to speed a race war. He's violently anti-black, and he could sing a song and carry a tune, and he had the natural hatred, and he loved the chicks, and he was just perfect for the role. He was just right for it. Now, Schiller went on that his livelihood when they let him out of this prison was that he was going to be a musician. Now, within 1 year, Lawrence Schiller says, Charlie Manson was out of prison mingling with the Hollywood stars in 1968. And the Manson family somehow was making it with the establishment. And they were going to be part of Hollywood's plushest parties. Now, Lawrence Schiller is telling you that a year later, Charlie is right in there with the biggest people of all. Now, that's pretty interesting, considering the lawyer that he saw before he got out of Treasure Island and the lawyer that Tex Watson is seeing before these crimes are committed, that these boys were wined and dined in the music scene, in the art scene, by certain people before the massacres took place. Now, Lauren Schiller said, in a true sense, the Manson family weren't hippies at all. Manson didn't like being called a hippie either. Well, I guarantee Lauren Schiller that the hippies didn't like it either. He knows they didn't. He said the hippies didn't like it. I know they didn't. It ended everything that was really good that was coming down. And then he concludes the introduction to his book on Sharon Tate saying it was a strange, satanic whim that sent those people into Benedict Canyon. And I claim it was more than a satanic whim, that the book that Mr. Kaiser puts out in Oakland and advertises in Esquire magazine, and the use of this word Satan and witchcraft is a conceived program disguised as covert government to come down on this generation. And it has succeeded, and nobody really feels safe in the area or around the country. And the effect that they wanted has happened, you see. Now, I just gave a sentence from an article a few last week, and I'm going back to conclude with a few remarks of Marshall Singer. It was an article that was printed in April 1970, Observations on the Sharon Tate Massacre and Charlie Manson. And he says Charlie Manson is certainly enigmatic. Is he a victim or a monster? He's equal parts of Charlie Chaplin and Jack the Ripper. He had been arrested 37 times in his 35 years. And Manson said, I'll tell you, I'm not from your society. I've spent most of my life in a world of bars and solitary confinement. And my philosophy comes from underneath the boots and the sticks and the clubs that they beat people with, who come from the wrong side of tracks. And people like me are society scapegoats. And this is James Ray, the same thing, society scapegoats. Jack Ruby is society scapegoat. He can be used. He's Jewish. He's poor. He's kicked around by the anti-Semites, the rich oil people. He's used when they want. He's stepped on when he wants. He is just a pushed around kid who wanted to make this world be recognized as just what he is, and always carrying this heavy load of anti-Semitism and underdog and playing a game with the military and the mafia and the oil people for approval and affection. If I do your work, will you love me now? The minute he shot Oswald, Jack Ruby said, I wanted to prove to them that I had guts. And he took the challenge. And Manson saying, people like me are society scapegoats. Now, the article by Marshall Singer goes on to say that Lawrence Schiller got the confessions of this Atkins girl. She was 21 and pretty, and she would say that she was victimized by Manson and how she had to hold Sharon Tate in her arms so Tex Charles Watson could stab this particular female who was pregnant and all the other people. Now, Manson had a lot of hostility. He tells you he was kicked around. His plans were to assemble these dune buggies and have an armada against the pigs, against the black people, against the cops. He would kill cops. He'd been arrested all these times. He'd been in isolation. He would kill them, but he would make it look like blacks did, and he would be getting even with blacks and cops at the same time, and he hoped to wipe out both groups that he hated so much. The article does say that in the early 60s, we had our own magical potions, and we had a handsome young president who held out promises, and when he was killed, a lot of the dreams went away. And when people like Manson break in with us, it is a reality too complex and too banal to understand. Now, in 1 hour, it's hard for me to really wrap up the complexity of this, because each week we talk about the covert government, the overthrow, changing the economic system. This was what the Sharon Tate massacre was about. And I hope that in this one brief hour, you can understand how minds all over the world can be affected by killing just 7 people and perverting the news media every day and every hour to keep this image going where the truth of the murders is different than what the news is saying.